Kids are often disarmingly precocious, but that doesn't mean they're suited to the demands of every role. These, frankly, were simply too much for a child to handle.
In 2007, 12-year-old Fanning shocked critics and viewing audiences alike by taking the role of the neglected, abused Llewellyn in this coming-of-age drama, which includes a scene in which her character is raped. Though the violent act is strictly implied with shots of Fanning's face and hands, the film was subject to intense backlash from viewers, critics, and activist groups who felt that the young actress shouldn't have been allowed to join the production. Fanning responded to criticism by pushing back, saying, "It's a movie and it's called acting. I wanted to do the film because I thought it might help one person that has happened to and help them overcome adversity in their lives." Unfortunately, Fanning's hopes of reaching abuse survivors were effectively undermined by the controversy, which killed the film's buzz. Hounddog only earned $131,000 against its $3 million budget after a limited release. 17 years before she danced her way to an Oscar win, Portman made her big screen debut in this 1993 thriller as Matilda, a little girl whose family is murdered by a corrupt DEA agent. When she takes refuge with a neighbor who happens to be a hitman, he becomes her mentor in all things vengeance, a relationship tinged by an uneasy chemistry between the two. At 12 years old, Portman was the exact same age as the character she was playing, and watching her smoke, shoot, and even hold a gun to her own head made for a shocking spectacle, albeit one that proved she was a star who could handle the most challenging roles out there.
One shot, not bad, huh?
This list wouldn't be complete without this chilling performance by Dunst in one of her very first feature film roles. In Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, Dunst's character Claudia was only 5 years old when she was turned into a vampire. But even for Hollywood, that would have been pushing it. Instead, the role went to the 11-year-old actress who went all out to capture the anger, violence, and near insanity of an adult woman who's trapped for eternity in the body of a little girl. As disturbing as it was to see Dunst tackle the challenging material, she did do an amazing job, earning a Golden Globe nomination and a permanent spot on the A-list for her performance. Long before he became famous for American Psycho, The Machinist, or the Dark Knight trilogy, Christian Bale won critical acclaim for playing the role of Jim in the 1987 Steven Spielberg war film Empire of the Sun. The movie is essentially a coming-of-age drama set during Japan's occupation of China during World War II. And Bale was just 13 when he took on the challenging role of a boy who goes from living a comfortable life with his family in Shanghai to growing up behind the barbed wire of a Japanese internment camp. Spielberg doesn't pull any punches with Empire of the Sun, and despite being just a child himself, Bale delivers an emotional and commanding performance as a boy faced with the horrors of war. Evil kids have been a staple of thriller and horror movies over the years, but that didn't stop audiences from being alarmed by the sight of little Kevin McAllister from Home Alone playing this cold-blooded, pint-sized psychopath in The Good Son. There's no supernatural element driving Henry's penchant for murder, he's just plain bad. When his cousin Mark, played by Elijah Wood, comes to visit Henry's family during winter vacation, things turn decidedly dark. It's hard to decide what's more disturbing, watching a 12-year-old try to kill everyone that crosses him,
Don't f with me.
or to pretend that it wasn't hilarious to watch this same little kid perpetrate savage acts of violence against two bumbling criminals in a John Hughes Christmas comedy just 3 years earlier. Because of the obvious Home Alone parallels, The Good Son wasn't really scary enough to make anyone scream, except maybe Culkin's parents, who had to watch Macaulay very convincingly attempt to murder his real-life sister Quinn in scenes like this one. Foster stirred up quite a controversy when she appeared as child prostitute Iris in Martin Scorsese's 1976 classic Taxi Driver.
You talking to me?
While not the central figure of the film, Iris still plays an important part when her path crosses with the troubled Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro. And Foster was just 12 when she played the role. For that reason, Scorsese took precautions. His young star was subjected to psych evaluations to make sure she could handle the job, and her older sister Connie was used as a stand-in for sexually suggestive scenes. Shakespeare's famous play centers on a pair of star-crossed teenage lovers, but it's also full of sex, violence, and suicide. That means that casting actual teenagers in the lead roles has historically raised some eyebrows. First came Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 adaptation, in which actress Olivia Hussey was only 15 and her Romeo Leonard Whiting was 17. 30 years later, director Baz Luhrmann went with an older Romeo in the form of Leonardo DiCaprio, who was 21 at the time. But Claire Danes, who played Juliet, was just 16, which made her 2 years older than her character, but in some folks' opinions, still much too young to be playing a scene like this on screen. Not many entries on the list can top 1997's experimental dystopian art film Gummo when it comes to making audiences squirm. Written and directed by Harmony Korine, Gummo chronicles the lives of several residents of Xenia, Ohio, following the effects of a devastating tornado. The movie comprises an interconnected series of scenes that offer a glimpse into depravity, demoralization, and the depths of poverty. With its linchpin performance by 13-year-old Jacob Reynolds as Solomon, a kid whose hobbies include killing cats, huffing glue, and paying a developmentally disabled girl to have sex with him. Most critics panned Gummo for its pervasive graphic content, but it was lauded by a few filmmakers, including famed director Werner Herzog, who particularly liked this scene featuring Solomon chowing down on junk food in a bathtub. The premise of Vladimir Nabokov's classic novel about a middle-aged man's sexual obsession with an adolescent girl makes it tough to adapt for the screen, especially when it comes to casting the title character. But that hasn't stopped directors from trying. In 1962, Stanley Kubrick did a more oblique take on the material, with James Mason as Humbert Humbert and Sue Lyon as Lolita. At 14, Lyon was 2 years older than her character, and Kubrick was careful to skirt the sexual content of Nabokov's novel.
Have you told her anything about us?
No. Have you?
But the film and Lyon's role in it still proved controversial, and this is one topic that hasn't become less of a hot potato with the passage of time, when director Adrian Lyne made his own Lolita more than 30 years later, with 15-year-old Dominique Swain in the title role. The movie was forced to premiere on cable when it couldn't find an American distributor, and critics in England even tried to get the film banned. As a girl, actress Brooke Shields appeared in 2 different movies that placed her front and center in the debate about children and on-screen sexuality. At age 12, she starred in Pretty Baby as a child prostitute living with her mother in a New Orleans brothel at the turn of the 20th century. The film, and Shields' nudity in it, was criticized by many, and the movie was even banned in 2 Canadian provinces.
Well,
you certainly did it, didn't you?
However, the backlash didn't put the actress off controversial material. Just 2 years later, Shields appeared in The Blue Lagoon as a shipwrecked girl growing up on an island with only her cousin, played by Christopher Atkins, for company. As they reach puberty, they eventually fall in love and even have a child, a plot point which raised eyebrows, as did several nude scenes involving the 14-year-old Shields. Widely recognized as one of the greatest horror movies of the 20th century, The Exorcist was also extremely controversial, with famed critic Roger Ebert even suggesting it deserved an X rating instead of the R it was given by the MPAA, even though he loved it. That's partly because of its horrifying subject matter, but the presence of an actual 13-year-old girl in the role of a possessed Regan McNeil was also considered problematic. Linda Blair's performance was central to some of the most disturbing, disgusting, obscene, and vulgar sequences in the film. Although she pushed back against rumors that being in the movie had psychologically scarred her. She explained, "A lot of untruthful stories were made up about me being mentally disturbed by the movie. I never was because I never bought into the whole devil thing. Instead, it was the physical demands of The Exorcist that had a prolonged impact." Blair fractured her spine while filming this levitation scene, an injury that would later develop into scoliosis and cause the actress ongoing health problems well into adulthood. This 1973 comedy drama is a lot more tame than some of the other entries on this list, but it definitely has its moments, like this one, where its 9-year-old star casually enjoys a cigarette before bedtime. Tatum O'Neal and real-life father Ryan O'Neal play characters named Addie and Mose, a pair of unlikely partners in crime on a cross-country road trip. Throughout the film, we watch the absolutely tiny Tatum smoke, drink, and con people out of their money like an old pro. And when Mose starts to neglect Addie in favor of an exotic dancer named Trixie, played by Madeline Kahn, the jealous girl even devises her own con to get Trixie dumped. The movie might have been more controversial if Tatum hadn't been so talented in the role. Her performance earned widespread acclaim, and she ultimately won an Academy Award for the part, making her the youngest competitive Oscar winner in history. At the age of 11, Moretz landed her most controversial role, vigilante superhero Hit Girl in the 2010 movie Kick-Ass. Compared to most little girls, and also to most grown men and women, Hit Girl is a hardened and nihilistic figure, punctuating her frequent murders with obscenity-laden one-liners. Kick-Ass met with backlash for its violence and language, with many critics especially horrified by Moretz's character, and it received a well-deserved R rating from the MPAA, which meant that its most hardcore tween-aged hero wasn't able to watch herself drop F-bombs and kick ass without adult supervision.
Okay. Jeez.
The first thing 12-year-old Tim does in River's Edge is throw his sister's doll into a river. It's a mean-spirited act, but it perfectly underscores the worldview of the small-town teens and director Tim Hunter's 1986 film. Their alienation manifests in ways from theft and drug use to cold-blooded killing. Tim is the youngest of the film's characters, but also the most casually immoral. By the end, Tim threatens to kill his own brother.
Shouldn't have hit me.
Don't be stupid, Tim.
Joshua John Miller, the son of playwright and actor Jason Miller, was just 12 years old when he replaced Corey Haim as Tim in River's Edge, and with only a handful of minor TV credits to his name. But he's totally convincing in carrying out Tim's list of cruelties, which includes stealing drug dealer Feck's gun and later assaulting him with it. Miller would play other kids on the edge, most notably in Near Dark, before transitioning to his current career as a writer and TV producer, but none were as chilling as Tim. The catalogue of cruelties perpetrated by Lena Klammer, a psychotic 33-year-old posing as an adolescent girl, isn't the most shocking element of 2009's Orphan. Lena kills multiple people, threatens other children, and attempts to seduce her adoptive father. But the really disturbing aspect of these incidents is that actress Isabelle Fuhrman was only 12 years old when the movie was made. Yet Fuhrman was more than happy to explore the gory aspects of a character. As she told the Boston Herald in 2009, "If America hates me, I've done my job." Fuhrman doubled down on her astonishing performance in Orphan First Kill, a prequel released 9 years after the previous film. Though 25 at the time, Fuhrman gave another chillingly believable turn as a 9-year-old Lena with the help of body doubles, forced perspective, and makeup special effects, but no CGI. Director William Brent Bell told Showbiz Cheat Sheet, "Sometimes I think the visual effects component of digital effects actually makes it look worse." In 13, Tracy Freeland, played by Evan Rachel Wood, is already close to emotional ground zero when she enters the 7th grade. Her divorced mom Melanie is a recovering alcoholic, and her body image problems have led to self-harming. When she meets popular girl Evie, played by co-writer Nikki Reed, her need for acceptance pushes her into rash acts, including shoplifting, drug use, and casual sex, that spiral into self-destructive behavior. Unfortunately, Tracy has only her fraught relationship with her mother as a support system. Director Catherine Hardwicke and Reed, who later collaborated on the Twilight franchise, drew on Reed's own experiences when writing 13. Although Reed later admitted that she exaggerated some of her experiences in the script, the anxiety and confusion of being a teen girl rings true in much of the film. Wood and Reed, who were 16 and 15 respectively at the time of filming, were strictly monitored by Hardwicke, their own mothers, and a child welfare worker during their most difficult scenes to ensure their emotional well-being. In a 2015 interview with the late Anne H. and Heather Duffy for their podcast Better Together with Anne and Heather, actress Mariel Hemingway said audiences would never see her Oscar-nominated breakout role in Woody Allen's 1979 comedy Manhattan if the movie was released in the current film market.
And I'm not condoning any behavior. I'm talking about that movie. But that movie probably couldn't come out today.
Why? For one, the film features a romantic relationship between a 42-year-old writer, played by Allen, and Hemingway's 17-year-old student. While that scenario might have been offbeat but acceptable in 1979 today, it reads as an older man's creepy manipulation of a young girl. Another reason is the accusations by Allen's adoptive daughter, Dylan Farrow, who alleged that he sexually abused her when she was just 7 years old. It's very difficult to keep that out of mind while watching Allen canoodle with the teenage Hemingway. But even the most forgiving viewer must know that the cultural landscape has changed, and that an adult with a teenager under 18 is inappropriate. Femme fatales have been a Hollywood trope since the days of silent films, but the stereotype takes an exploitative turn when the dangerous woman in question is a teenager. The 1992 movie Poison Ivy aimed for a cross between film noir and Fatal Attraction in its story of a sexually free but homicidally inclined teen. The casting of Drew Barrymore, then in a career rebound after struggles with drug addiction, and name players like Sarah Gilbert and Tom Skerritt attempted to lend respectability to the sleazy role. Barrymore, then 17, isn't particularly convincing at depicting Ivy, a deranged teen so taken with Gilbert's normal life that she's willing to seduce her father and kill her mother. The character is aware of her desirability, but unable to use it for anything except base interests. Barrymore gamely handles the story's most prurient aspects, which include making out with the 17-year-old Gilbert and 60-year-old Skerritt and pushing Cheryl Ladd off a balcony. The 1998 film adaptation of Stephen King's novella Apt Pupil differs from its source material, but the film retains its disturbing portrait of evil's corrupting influence. The late Brad Renfro stars as Todd, a teenager who discovers that his elderly neighbor, Kurt Dusander, played by Ian McKellen, is a former Nazi. The team blackmails Dusander into telling grisly stories from concentration camps. Their relationship warps both men in dangerous ways. Todd blackmails his guidance counselor, while Kurt starts killing transients. Though some of the grislier elements of King's story are toned down for the movie, many are featured in Brandon Boyce's script. For Renfro, who was 17 years old during production, that meant participating in scenes where Todd helped kill a homeless man and a fantasy sequence in which he envisions his classmates as concentration camp prisoners, which prompted a lawsuit against director Bryan Singer for infliction of emotional distress and other charges. Todd's corrupted innocence was familiar to Renfro throughout his acting career in films including The Client, and tragically in his own life off camera, which ended with his 2008 death from a drug overdose at the age of 25. Peter Kartlar was just 11 years old when he was cast in Czech director Václav Mahal's 2019 adaptation, Jerzy Kaczynski's novel The Painted Bird. He couldn't have picked a more harrowing story for his debut. The movie follows a mostly silent boy wandering through a surreal hellscape in Eastern Europe during the early days of World War II. The boy is brutalized, beaten, sexually assaulted, and tortured, and witnesses horrific behavior by every adult he meets. Kartlar had never acted on film before, but holds his own in scenes opposite Stellan Skarsgård, Harvey Keitel, and the late Julian Sands. In an interview with The Guardian, Mahal said he shielded Kartlar from the most traumatizing scenes by capturing his reactions separately from the action. He also relied on Kartlar's family and a full-time assistant to provide him with emotional support when it was needed. Despite their protection, the experience seems to have impacted Kartlar, Mahal said, after he told me he doesn't want to be an actor. Alicia Silverstone made her big screen debut in The Crush, a supremely icky thriller that casts a 17-year-old actress as a 14-year-old lethal Lolita with designs on a 28-year-old journalist played by Carrie Elwes. The film, directed by TV vet Alan Shapiro, plays on familiar sexist tropes about teenage girls and the clueless adult men who fall for them.
Oh my freaking clown!
Elwes' character steps into every snare laid by Silverstone and then experiences a moment of crisis about her age, which is supposed to generate sympathy when she unleashes a torment of psychotic behavior on him. The Crush portrays Silverstone as a contemptible object, while also fetishizing her sexuality. As the film's villain, she's given all sorts of outlandish schemes to carry out. She nearly kills Elwes' new girlfriend and pins a charge of sexual assault on him. At the same time, the film also affirms that it's okay to enjoy the camera ogling a supposed 14-year-old at every turn. The Washington Post review summed up the film's have-it-both-ways approach by noting, "There's something scuzzy about the whole exercise." Director Scott Derrickson's thriller The Black Phone is so briskly paced that viewers might almost miss the storyline's truly horrible elements. An adaptation of a short story by Joe Hill, the film focuses on Finney, played by Mason Thames, a teenager who has been abducted by a child murderer known as the Grabber. Though terrified, Finney begins to receive visions and messages from the Grabber's deceased victims and formulates an escape plan. Finney's communication with the victims is so otherworldly that it's almost easy to forget these kids have died in particularly tragic ways. They were stolen off the streets of their hometowns and tormented by a sadistic masked killer who eventually took their lives in a way that undoubtedly really hurts, as the Grabber puts it. The unendurable sadness of Finney's fate and their deaths is felt in the emotional line readings by Thames, who was 14 when the film was released in 2021, and his young castmates. In 2015's Goodnight Mommy, a woman returns to her isolated home after surgery where her twin sons greet her. At least they believe she's their mother, but her angry, often violent reactions to them cause the boys to suspect otherwise. They hold her captive in increasingly cruel ways to extract a confession from her. But what they eventually discover is far more complicated and chilling than a simple imposter situation. Adding considerably to the creepiness of this Austrian film is that two young boys play the twins, Elias and Lucas Schwartz, who, according to various sources, were 12 while filming, carry out many unsettling acts. They raise huge cockroaches and look after a dead cat, and eventually tie down and seal their alleged mother's mouth shut to prevent her from screaming for help. When she refuses to change her story, the boys glue her to the floor and set the house ablaze. By that point, it's far too late for anyone to change their story. Michael Haneke's 1997 film Funny Games is a polarizing experience. You're either wowed by the movie's deliberate manipulation to produce maximum horror or completely disgusted by its catalogue of sadism. The brutality two strangers bring upon an Austrian family is painful to watch, and the torment seems to have no point beyond amusing the culprits. The family's son Shoshi suffers some of the worst abuse. Not only does he witness his parents' torture, but he also stumbles upon the corpse of his neighbor's daughter in an attempt to flee. The boy, played by German actor Stefan Klapczynski, who was only 11 at the time of filming, is also featured in one of the film's most infamous scenes, when he's mercilessly shot by one of the strangers. The on-screen death of a child is upsetting for audiences, but when accompanied by so much other awful behavior, it's an almost unbearable experience.
Kiernan Shipka was only 7 years old when Mad Men started airing, but it wasn't actually her on-screen debut. In fact, she was already a seasoned performer as she already had years of commercials under her belt. It was the perfect blend of talent and experience, which is why she made Sally Draper one of Mad Men's most iconic characters. But before Shipka's range and depth became obvious enough to get her promoted to a series regular, her character existed partly to emphasize just how lax 60s parenting could be. For one, Sally gets lessons in mixing cocktails, especially her dad's beloved Old Fashions. She also runs through the house playing spaceman with her mom's dry cleaning bag over her head. This prompted a rare moment of parental intervention.
If the clothes from that dry cleaning bag are on the floor of my closet, you're going to be a very sorry young lady.
Holly Taylor played Paige Jennings on The Americans, the daughter of Russian spies embedded in 1980s suburban America. In order to embody the role, Taylor needed to become a powerhouse performer, and she did. As Paige got drawn into her parents' world of secrets and lies, Taylor had to take her character to some dark, shattering places. It was a lot to ask of a performer who was only 13 when she started on the show. However, what the show asked of Taylor was emotionally exhausting. There was a stretch of episodes where it felt like all she did was cry, and that drained her. But as she told The Observer, the crying wasn't as demanding as the sheer complexity of adult emotions she had to summon to play a girl whose whole life has been turned upside down. Ian Armitage first rose to internet fame doing YouTube reviews of live theater. That background in criticism, in separating fiction from truth, probably turned out to be especially good training for Armitage. His role as Ziggy Chapman on HBO's Big Little Lies required a sophisticated understanding of appearance versus reality that a lot of young actors couldn't have mastered. And given some of the dark places the series goes to, not having that understanding could have had high stakes. Throughout the show's first season, Armitage had to play Ziggy with real ambiguity. A large part of the plot centers on accusations that Ziggy has been biting a little girl in his class, and the audience has to wonder whether or not he's capable of those kinds of outbursts of unsettling violence.
Someone is biting our daughter!
In Season 2, Ziggy also has to face the knowledge that he was conceived through rape. Luckily, Armitage seems to have a firm grasp on the boundaries of his part. He told the New York Times, "Movies is basically just playing, but bigger and with people watching." A regular on The Shield, Autumn Chiklis played Cassidy, the daughter of the show's compelling and often terrifying anti-hero Vic Mackey. Vic Mackey was portrayed by Michael Chiklis, Autumn's real-life father. Her role sometimes dipped into disturbing territory, especially as Cassidy grew a little older and had to confront some of the fallout of her dad's dirty dealings. Meanwhile, Autumn's parents had strong feelings about her being on the show. She told The Hollywood Reporter years later, "I was on The Shield and I was not allowed to watch it all 6 years because they did not want me to see him in that light. Thankfully, there was no danger of Autumn confusing her father and his character." She went on to add, "I'm deeply close with my dad. He's my best friend in the entire world." The Wire's gritty, unsparing look at the realities of the war on drugs means that pretty much none of the children who rotate through its cast get out unscathed. This was especially the case in the 4th season with a character named Daquan Dookie Weems. Dookie was played by 12-year-old Jermaine Crawford. Dookie's life is marred by bullying and pervasive neglect, and even the attention and help he gets from new teacher Mr. Perez can't ultimately pull him out of his downward spiral. He's a sweet kid with loyal friends and genuine talent, but in the grim social order of The Wire, he's still doomed. The young Crawford had to show Dookie's gradual descent into homelessness and heroin use. His performance is heartbreaking, and Crawford's obvious youth only emphasizes how much Dookie's life is being wasted. One of the ultimate compliments on his tragic performance is that even as Dookie's childhood is stripped away from him, Crawford portrays him with such an essential innocence that viewers never see him as hardened or even an old soul. Deadwood is Bree Shauna Wall's only screen credit, and when you look at her part, it's easy to imagine how the budding actor might have been scared off. She plays Sophia Metz, a Norwegian girl who is orphaned after an attack on her parents' wagon train. As a result of witnessing her parents' slaughter, Sophia retreats into terrified muteness. It didn't exactly help that Ian McShane's character, the local kingpin Al Swearingen, then spent much of the show's first season debating whether or not to have the child killed as part of a cover-up. It's probably good that Sophia spent so much time either not talking or unable to speak English, because otherwise, a lot of her dialogue would have been heartbreaking. Few actors can provide as much terrifying, perversely genial menace as Ian McShane, and having him loom threateningly over little Sophia is enough to strike fear into our hearts, let alone walls. Dysfunction is the bread and butter of The Mick, the Fox comedy about an irresponsible slacker who gets unexpectedly saddled with caring for her wealthy niece and nephews when their parents go on the run from the FBI. The show's comedic masterpiece is arguably Ben, played by Jack Stanton.
Can you at least put the leash back on?
Why do you want the leash?
I don't know. I just like it.
Ben is as sweet and innocent as any kid could possibly be, and there was nothing the Mick liked better than having him stumble into R-rated situations. It's worse because they're all bad decisions and mishaps easily accessible to most children his age. We have to feel for Stanton's poor parents, who have to try to explain why their young son shouldn't lick a hibachi grill, gobble up birth control pills, and so on and so on. It's the kind of part that cries out for an actor old enough to easily differentiate between fiction and reality. FX's Kentucky Crime series, Justified, rarely required the casting of child actors, which makes it even more impressive that they wound up with such a standout. In Season 2, it introduced Caitlin Deaver's Loretta McCready, a practical, enterprising, and vulnerable teenage girl whose life gets tragically caught up in the crime empire run by Mags Bennett. After Mags kills Loretta's father, she winds up taking her in, encouraging her to think of the Bennetts as her family. Deaver's tenure on the show required her to play heartbreak and betrayal as Loretta runs an unbelievable gamut of emotions until she hardens enough to start the work of becoming a criminal queenpin in her own right. Deaver was only a young teen when she started playing Loretta, and she wound up being one of the emotional linchpins of what many critics regard as the show's best season. Her high-octane emotions in that part helped lead her to her role in the film Short Term 12, where she played a troubled girl in a group home. After multiple dramas specializing in girls who had to grow up too fast, it was probably refreshing for her to land the part in 2019's Booksmart, a comedy where her character is finally an ordinary high school girl dealing with ordinary milestones.
It was the best shoot I've ever been on.
HBO's Rome is equal parts tragedy and romped, fueled by violence, raw sexuality, and political gamesmanship that often involves all of the above. And in the middle of all that is a child. We're talking about the young Octavian, the eventual Caesar Augustus, who's first played by 16-year-old Max Purkis. Octavian looks harmless, but the show quickly reveals that he has a natural talent for political scheming. But Purkis was asked to do more than just show Octavian playing all the angles. Rome often leaned on the squirmy dissonance it could provoke in its viewers when ancient Rome's different and sometimes appalling norms, including slavery, animal sacrifice, and sexual assault, were put on screen. And few were better vehicles for that than Octavian, who even before the show's timeskip aged him up, had slept with his sister, been ordered to visit a brothel, and been extravagantly praised for having the foresight to seduce his uncle. Being a sitcom about a family never made Arrested Development a family sitcom. One of the ways the show liked to gleefully emphasize that was by repeatedly teasing the possibility of incest between cousins George Michael Bluth, played by Michael Cera, and Maybe Funke, played by Alia Shawkat. Shawkat was only 14 when the show started airing, and Cera was 15. While they were old enough to probably have a sense of humor about their characters' will they won't they arc, it's still odd when you think about the show repeatedly making jokes about how they might wind up doing some taboo-breaking kissing. Arrested Development was adept at testing boundaries in the name of comedy, so it smartly used Cera and Shawkat's youth as another barrier to nudge to get laughs. While Millie Bobby Brown's role as Eleven on Stranger Things is demanding, most of its ups and downs involve things like hitting the limits of her telekinetic powers or needing to hide from sinister government agents. They're the kind of dangers that are separated from reality by a few degrees, and that can be enough to make them fun instead of harrowing. But while Eleven gradually embraces her powers, the show starts with her in a low and heartbreaking place, one that really hurts. She's playing an abused, terrified, and dehumanized child whose early emotional support comes only from Matthew Modine's sadistic Dr. Brenner, the man she's been taught to call Papa. Her screaming and asking him for help during horrific experiments is a painful and familiar echo of ordinary child abuse. The most adult thing Brown has had to tackle, however, has just been the extreme stardom, which has opened her up to a barrage of internet trolling and tabloid criticism. Brown has had remarkable grace in handling it, however. The actor told Harper's Bazaar, "Internet trolls have never bothered me. I honestly actually feel really bad for them because who knows what they're going through."